Hello, everyone. Getting it all to go live properly. All right. Hello, everyone, again. Well, sort of again. I was live at 11 a.m. for story time, and I am now here for our September edition, virtually, of Brown Bags and Books, which is the monthly book discussion that we have here at the library. We haven't been able to host this program since February due to COVID and closures, social distancing. We aren't having any programs in person. So I decided to bring my discussion virtually for you. This month I am discussing 2 books. I like to do that. I will show these again. I'm just popping on early, a few minutes before noon, for people to come in, get settled. So this month I am discussing, you could say I'm comparing and contrasting them, The Book Woman of Troublesome Creek by Kim Michelle Richardson. This book is about, my copy has the reading group. It's got some pictures in here. It is, oh my goodness, 286 pages, and it is published by Source Books Landmark in 2019. So there are some great pictures in the back. This is the copy that we do. This is my personal copy, but we have this paperback copy upstairs, and it's got photographs in the back, like this one. Public Library Service in Kentucky. Now, this book is taking place during the Great Depression. The second book I am discussing is Jojo Moyes, The Giver of Stars. You may know Jojo as the author of the book to movie Me Before You, but The Giver of Stars is published by Pamela Dorman Books, Viking, an imprint of Penguin Random House, and this is copyright 2019. This is my personal hardcover copy, and we have this one just like this. It's about 387 pages, so that's what we're talking about today. The Book Woman of Troublesome Creek and The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. So I'll give everyone another minute to pop in, and if you have any questions, comments, anything at all, please pop them in the box, because that is what our Brown Bags and Books is great for when we have it in person, because it's a little discussion. We bounce off of each other. We go around. We have comments, questions. So that's why we decided to do this live for you. So please, if you have anything, and bear with me. So I'm going to get a drink. It's a few minutes after 12. This is going to stay up live. We can leave it on our Facebook page. I'm not going to be reading long passages from the book, so I don't have to worry about copyright or anything of that nature. So you can come back and watch this at any time. Don't worry, I'm not going to delete it. So our 2 books today. I guess I'm back bringing books in controversy, because last year with my review at this time in September 2019, I reviewed The Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn and Bring Her Back by B.A. Paris. They, to me, were very eerily similar. And then as I was doing research, I was finding out that The Woman in the Window was almost exactly like a book called Saving April by Sarah Denzel. And so it was interesting to talk about those thrillers and the main characters and their similarities. So last year I did thrillers, and this year I'm coming back with historical fiction, except some of this isn't all fiction. So my 2 favorite genres are thrillers and history. So I enjoy reading them and talking about them, and I've even been able to find a few that are historical thrillers. So It just seemed obvious to go with historical fiction this year. Once again, to prepare for this, I feel like I'm treating it like a school discussion, a paper, a presentation. But I reread both books. I first read them last October, so I reread them again this summer. I tried to listen to both of them, but I was only able to listen to this one. It's on our Hoopla app, and that's a free app you can use if you have a Harrisburg library card, and the accent of the reader is great. It's very, very Kentucky, and I really enjoyed listening to this book. I didn't get a chance to listen to this one because it was not on Hoopla, but it's on the Cloud Library, but the wait was several months. We do have an audiobook copy of this upstairs if you have a CD player. Our director, Crystal, you know her, she listened to this, really enjoyed it. So I read several articles. If you could see my spread right here, you would laugh. I listened to a couple of podcasts last night, and one from each author. Now, Jojo Moyes is English, so her English accent was great. But Kim Michelle Richardson, this author, she is born in Kentucky, so she has that Kentucky accent. So, English, Kentucky. So this year is all about the Pack Horse Librarians. So I'm sure you have heard of them, hopefully. I actually hadn't heard of them until these books, really, which is kind of incredible and amazing. So the topic of the Pack Horse Librarians really took off a couple of years ago when an article went viral about them. I think the exact article was this one from Smithsonian called Horse Riding Librarians Were the Great Depression's Bookmobiles. It was written by Eliza McGraw, and it was published June 21st, 2017. You can find this online. So Pack Horse Librarians are exactly what they sound like. They were mostly women, sometimes men, on horses, mules, delivering books to promote literacy in that eastern area of Kentucky. The Pack Horse Librarian Initiative was implemented during the Great Depression. The project was part of the Works Project Administration, which was launched by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It ran from 1935 to 1943, and the only pay this project received was to the librarians themselves from the government. It was typically about $28 a month, and I think I read somewhere that is about $495 in modern day dollars. So using that money, they had to pay, maybe to rent a horse or a mule, to buy all the feed. Perhaps they lived in a boarding house. They had to pay for food. So they had to really stretch that $28. Everything else had to be sourced out or donated. So the government didn't find a building for them. They didn't buy the books. They didn't do anything else. It was all up to the people in the areas where these libraries popped up. The librarians, like I said, were mostly women, traversing the hills and the hollers, the creek beds and the trails that didn't exist except by memory. And yes, they would sometimes travel. The only directions were go up to the creek bed, turn right, and go a half a mile until you see the tree that's crooked, and go up the hill. So it was directions like that. In the Giver of Stars story, the main character leads the new Pack Horse Librarian and leaves strings tied to trees for her to have directions as she travels around. They would go sometimes 18 to 20 miles a day. They were atop a horse or a mule, and sometimes they were going by foot if that hill was simply too steep to be on top of the animal. They were carrying the bags full of books. They were delivering the books in extremely rural and desolate. Here we go. I had to ask Ray yesterday if I was going to pronounce this correctly. Appalachian region of eastern Kentucky. I always remembered it because you were saying throw an apple at ya. So Appalachian region of eastern Kentucky. And I printed out a handy map for you. You can see my wonderfully outlined Kentucky there. So we are over here very specifically. And the area that we are talking about is right here where that pin drop is. The Appalachian region. I searched for Troublesome Creek, And that is what Google Maps gave me, is right here on that pin. And yes, Troublesome Creek was a real creek. So this is based off a true area. There's also an area called Hell for Sartin. HELL dash FER dash SARTIN. Said really fast, just like that. Hell for Sartin. They were delivering books to these almost illiterate families in Kentucky. In 1930, up to 31% of Eastern Kentucky could not read. And let's see. Can't remember the exact statistics, but I think for every 10 people in Kentucky, there was one book, whereas versus the rest of the country, there were 10 books. So the statistics and numbers were really desolate in Kentucky. So almost everyone was illiterate. There weren't books. So these families were really interested in getting the picture books because the pictures would help the literate children teach the illiterate parents how to read. And they requested magazines like Popular Mechanics or Ladies' Home Companion were in high demand. I mean, think about all the tips, the fishing, the taking care of the babies, the recipes, the fix-it, the do-it-yourselves. And what they would do, which I think is just, I'm telling you, I have too much stuff here, so cool, is that imagine these magazines being toted around in these bagfuls atop horses, being traded among families, and they were just falling. They would, at times, these magazines would fall apart. And so one of the librarians, I don't know if we know exactly which one started it, and it's mentioned in these books. They would take the scraps of the magazines that were still good and create scrapbooks. So they would take the good recipe for sugar dumplings and keep the information about bird watching or making a fishing line or building an outhouse. They would keep those good articles from those magazines and books and paste them into a scrapbook. In one of the articles I read from BlueRidgeCountry.com says, Jason Vance of Middle Tennessee State University's James E. Walker Library traveled to the FDR Presidential Library in Hyde Park, New York, to read and photograph the collected scrapbooks. Now, when the librarians would make these scrapbooks, they would loan them out just like the books. They fall, Vance writes in his 2012 article in Library and Information History, into 11 themed categories: recipes, mountain ballads, pictures, postcards, biographical sketches of famous people, local histories, Kentucky history, quilt patterns, odd place names, local flora, and collections of articles on a given subject. There was also a great demand for the religious materials, and many of the scrapbooks featured scripture and Sunday school lessons. So these librarians would take the materials falling apart and put them together, compile them, and they would include many of the contributions from library patrons along their routes. Several of the books would mention these Kentucky people did not feel like taking these books from the librarians, even though it was a free program, without giving anything in return. So they would share, put this quilt pattern in your scrapbook, put this recipe for the apple dumplings, share this my mama's famous pie recipe. And so they would get these donations from their patrons to put in the libraries too. So in 1940, 2,653 scrapbooks were circulated among pack horse librarian patrons. They became important cultural artifacts that offer a window into the lives and interests of readers in the Depression area, Appalachian region of Eastern Kentucky. So it was a way for them to reuse every single thing they had. Okay, that was the life in the 1930s, to reuse, to keep it, to never throw anything away. So I forgot to get one thing. So while I'm doing that, the first one I'm going to talk about, give you a little bit of a review on, is this Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek. Like I said, this was written by Kim Michelle Richardson in 2019. And I am getting on YouTube now to get the book trailer. Yes, there is a book trailer. The source book for the Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek. I popped that into the comments. You can watch that at any time. It's really cool. The music, I mean, sounds very, and the voice is very Kentucky. So this was May 7th, 2019. The timeline between these books and what the authors say is kind of the big controversy here. So Richardson is born and raised in Kentucky. So there was some that say that because of that, you can really hear the richness of the dialect, the names of the people and places. They said Troublesome Creek and Helfersarton are real places. So she is a native Kentuckian. So she really knew about the areas, the Kentucky life that she was writing about. Now, Richardson states that she started her research in 2015, floated the idea to her agent in 2016, and had a finished manuscript by July 2017. So it took for a while before it was purchased by Source Books, and they are actually a publisher in Illinois. I think that timeline was October 2017. So now what makes this story truly stand out is the main character. Her name is Cussy Mary Carter. Yes, Cussy. They say that's a place in France, and that's where her original ancestors in the book came from, Cussy Mary Carter. She is the last in the area of a line of blue people. That's right, the blue people of Kentucky. So I'm going to do a quick tidbit on those blue people of Kentucky. Where did I put my blue people of Kentucky information? Okay, so the blue people of Kentucky are all believed to have descended from a man named Martin Fugate. He was the year's 1820, and he's a French orphan that arrived in Troublesome Creek in eastern Kentucky. So there he meets and marries a woman named Elizabeth Smith, described as being as pale as the mountain laurel that blooms every spring around the creek hollows, and she was red-haired. But the thing is that at the time, Martin was not like any of the other men in the area. He had a rare genetic condition that turned his skin a striking indigo blue. So yes, the blue people of Kentucky is a real thing, and that is who the main character of our book is about. So this photo is not real. Don't take it to be real. I'm fairly certain it's a painting. I don't think you can find a real picture of these people. So this is what someone painted that these blue people of Kentucky looked like. You can tell they have a slight blue tinge to their skin. So don't take this as what they truly looked like. I think Kim Richardson states that there is no real photo of these people that can be found. So Martin and Elizabeth went on to have 7 children, and 4 of them, just like their father, had blue skin. So it is a rare genetic condition, and it's a condition called, I'm going to try this, it's a very big word, methemoglobinemia. METHEMOGLOBINEMIA, methemoglobinemia, which causes the methemoglobin levels in the red blood cells to rise above 1%. It turns the skin cells blue, the lips purple, and the blood a chocolate brown. It can be triggered by chemicals, or in the case of the Fugates, it was a rare genetic faulty gene. So there was no physical health problems with these people featured in the book. They lived to be 80 or 90. It was not a health problem. There was nothing wrong with them. The only thing that was wrong with the Fugates is that people didn't like them because of their skin color. It caused shame. I mean, people just looked at them like they were different, like it was going to be, like they could touch them and get the skin color. So they were discriminated against just by their skin color, and that's how Cussy Mary is treated in the book. People don't even want to touch her. They're scared that it's like they would just, like I said, receive the skin problem. It caused these Fugates to go higher up in the mountain, and they were socially isolated, and the problem was is that it made the problem larger because methemoglobinemia is, in almost all cases, it said a product of inbreeding. So somehow in 1820, when Martin Fugate came from France and landed in Troublesome Creek, Kentucky, he found that woman with the same rare genetic trait he had. Hers was recessive, but his showed, and when they got married and they had children, it came back out again. So that was the members of the Fugate tribe in Kentucky, and that is what Cussy Mary Carter in the story is. She is the daughter of a coal miner. Her mother has passed away. She disagrees in the beginning. Her father is lighting her courting candle, and she says it's in the 1936. The new year was barely 15 years old in Troublesome Creek, Kentucky, when my pa adjusted the courting candle, setting it to burn for an alarming length of time. So her pa really wants her to get married because he says it was the last promise he made to her mother, that he wouldn't leave her alone. He'd get her to be a married woman. But Cussy Mary disagrees with that. She doesn't want to be married. She is just fine being a single woman at home, taking care of her father, and she is a pack horse librarian. She, as an unmarried woman, can stay a pack horse librarian, but if she gets married, she can't do that. So she is a blue person, which we just discussed all that. She's an outcast. She is considered colored. And there is a black librarian named Queenie. So Cussy Mary faces her own racism in her travels as pack horse librarian with the families she delivers to. Many of the women, it's fine with them, but it's the men that don't want her touching them. They think she's going to make them sick. And even the two main librarians, the director, I guess, and the assistant at the pack horse library, don't want to touch her. They will slide her paycheck across the counter to her and just act like she's not there. She's not good enough. So this is the story of her, Cussy Mary Carter, and she takes care of these families, brings them things to read, and they're not only seeing families, they're seeing school children. They visit schools. So there is that book. The second one is Jojo Moyes, The Giver of Stars. Now, this one was also published in 2019 and October 8th. So this was May 7th, October 8th. In a podcast I listened to, Jojo Moyes said that she had first heard of the pack horse librarians in June 2017 when it came to this same Smithsonian article. So she heard about them by reading this article and was very interested in them. Now, this was published by Penguin Random House, and fun fact, in 2019 when these books were published, Penguin Random House owned a 45% stake in Sourcebooks, which is the publisher of this. Now, both agents claim that neither had heard, that Moyes had never heard of this book before. No one at the imprint for The Giver of Stars had ever heard of anything about this book. So, Moyes states that part of the reason why I wrote the book so quickly was because that I worried someone else would write it before me. It said that she wrote the book feverishly in 9 months and got it out there. She went to Kentucky to research, rode some of those same trails on horseback, stayed in a cabin, tried to immerse herself in the landscape. So in our book set in 1937, it features two main characters. There is Marjorie, who was born and grew up in that area in Kentucky and is the pack horse librarian in the beginning. And then there is Alice, who came to Kentucky from England via a marriage. So Alice meets Marjorie in the beginning, who already works, like I said, for the pack horse librarian. And even though Alice is married, she gets a job with these pack horse librarians. So Marjorie, like Cussie, is a very strong, independent, opinionated woman, and that neither of them feel the need to get married. Both characters are very devoted to their work of getting the books into the hands of their patrons in the hills and hollers. And like Cussie Mary, Marjorie is distrusted by most of the people in the area because she is an O'Hare. And the O'Hares, for as long as anyone in the area can remember, have had a long-standing feud with the family of the McCulloughs in the area. I think it is all due to moonshining and all of that. So people in the area do not trust Marjorie, just like they do not trust Cussie because of her skin, because of her family. So Alice's story is different because she has a lot of growth to do in the beginning to the end. So she imagined moving to Kentucky to get away from her family. It was going to be a great, fabulous life, but small town Kentucky life is not what she imagined, and neither is her married life. So the pack horse job is what gives Alice life. And so that is kind of a quick recap of the characters of the story. They're both pack horse librarians going through the things that happen to them, the patrons they meet, both based against coal mining towns. Her Cussie's father is a coal miner. The man that Marjorie loves but will not marry is a inspector for the coal mines, and the town is all based around the coal mine. And the man that Alice, the woman from England, marries, his father owns a coal mine. So a lot about the coal mining town, and both set in 1936 and 1937 against the Great Depression. And so now, does anybody have, I don't think there'll be any questions. These pack horse librarians took the books and traveled and did all kinds of things. And all right, here we go. So on October 7th, 2019, the BuzzFeed News writer Tomi Obaro wrote a great article. Jojo Moyes has been accused of publishing a novel with alarming similarities to another author's book. So remember the timeline here. Released May 7th, 2019. Released October 8th, 2019. And this article came out October 7th. Now, before this was released, there were ebook copies for people to review, to start getting the word out about it. So people were reading this book before it actually came out in May. It was released as an ebook first. And so people knew about this book. And I'm not sure how long the actual publishing process is, but she says she wrote her book 9 months. And October is the 10th month of the year. But of course, they can't say that it came out and was published and put out right on October 7th and no one had ever heard of it. So several of the articles say that the big thing when it comes to plagiarism is the timeline and determining copyright infringement. In fiction writing particularly, copyright infringement is hard to prove. In February of 2019, for example, the New York Times published a story about striking similarities between the novelist Daniel Mallory, aka A.J. Finn, The Woman in the Window, and Cyril Denzel's Saving April. So that's the ones I reviewed last year, and the New York Times talked about those similarities in the two books. So, of this these similarities, which there's a list of, and I'm going to go through to give you all some of the facts that you need to be able to decide. Richardson says, and she is the author of The Book Woman of Troublesome Creek. Richardson says, history is not proprietorial, but the disturbing similarities found in Moyes' book are too many and too specific and quite puzzling. Let me start that all over. History is not proprietorial, Richardson said, but the disturbing similarities found in Moyes' book are too many and too specific and quite puzzling, she added in an email. None of the similarities found in Moyes' novel can be chalked up to the realities of history, nor can be found in any historical records, archives, or photographs of the Pack Horse Librarian Project initiative that I meticulously studied. These fictional devices and plot points were the ones that I imagined. And I mean, yeah, there's a lot of books out there that have a lot of similarities, but we've never had any books about Pack Horse Librarians published till last year with both of these. Okay? So, both main characters face a lot of distrust from the people around them. And now, Richardson has said that she went to a Kentucky library archive and talked to the librarian there for a lot of the information in her book. But there are, in this article, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different similarities that Tomi Obaro has come up with between these two books. Now, first off, both of them have men that come at them and attack them on the trails while they were out by themselves. In this story, it is a man named Hillman Vester Frazier. He lies in wait in the woods for the female librarian Cussie, accosts her, and accuses her of doing the devil's work by carrying sinful books to good and godly folks. You're unclean, born of sin. You're a devil, girl. And then there's a scuffle as Cussie's mule tries to attack Frazier and trample him. There's that. In The Giver of Stars, right in the prologue on page 4, Marjorie meets with Hillman Clem McCullough, one of the men in that family her own family had a feud with. He lies in wait for her, accosts her, and says, where's that? You think we don't know what you've all been doing? You think we don't know what you've been spreading among decent, God-fearing women? We know what you're up to. You got the devil in you, Marjorie O'Hare, and there's only one way to get the devil out of a girl like you. So he tries to tell her to shut up. There's a scuffle, and then the librarian's mule lurches, stumbling, and Clem McCullough is knocked to the ground and trampled on, and a book is kind of thrown at her and or thrown at him. So there's your first similarity. Both women on the trail are accosted by men that think they are unclean and they just want to get the devil out of them. So now you can imagine that what happens to both of those men, and yes, it happens in both books. I won't tell you how, I won't tell you when, but something happens to both of those men that have attacked the women. That is similarity number 2. Number 3, both books have a black librarian, and I'm imagining 1936-37 Eastern Kentucky was not heavily populated by black people. So in The Book Woman, There's Queenie. She's a strong, smart black librarian who works for the Pack Horse Library Project. She actually delivers. She has a route she goes on, and then later she moves to Philadelphia and gets a job there with her takes her family there, and she writes back to Cussy Mary. In The Giver of Stars, there is Sophia, a strong, smart black woman who becomes part of the Pack Horse Project, except in this story, she is kept inside the building and at nighttime so she can help organize the books and repair the books that the women bring back. She previously worked at a library, and so she, once again in the book, also goes to work in a library just like Queenie did. And I think that Richardson said at one point there was never any actual evidence that there was ever a black librarian in any of the libraries in Kentucky that actually existed. So, in her podcast that I listened to, Moyes says about Sophia, "This is not strictly a thing from the time, because to my knowledge there were no black pack horse librarians, but I wanted to have a woman of color in the team, and I didn't want her to be a maid. If you look at Kentucky from that time, A, it's very white, and B, people of color were limited to the jobs they could do. And then I discovered that Louisville, Kentucky housed the first colored library, as it was known, so I suddenly realized that I could have this woman not just an equal footing with the others, but she could be a fully trained librarian. I think that was the first place in the whole of the U.S. where there was a library for colored people. In fact, I think there were 2 branches of it. So that's why Sophia is there, and that's why she became a librarian." So there's Jojo Moyes defending her choice to put Sophia in there. So there we have 3 similarities so far. And then the 4th one that is brought up in this BuzzFeed article is that both of these books, remember, 1936, 1937, mention the book called The Good Earth by Pearl S. Buck. So I was thinking, well, maybe it was a big winner. Maybe, what was going on in that time period. So I did a little research and I looked up some of the other books that were published in the 1930s. As I Lay Dying was 1930. The Maltese Falcon, 1930. The Good Earth was published in 1931, and it was a bestseller in 31 and 32, and it won the Pulitzer Prize in 1932, so perhaps that's why. But then if you remember, The Good Earth is based on a Chinese village. It kind of seems not quite what you would expect for these Eastern Kentucky people to be reading and loving, and for what to be mentioned in these 2 books. The Joy of Cooking was first self-published in 1931. A Brave New World was published in 1932. Gone with the Wind was published in 1936. It became a bestseller in 36 and 37 and won the Pulitzer Prize. Nightwood was published in 1936. And How to Win Friends and Influence People was published in 1936. I was reading about some of these books and realizing, wow, I didn't know that these were published in the 1930s. Not only Mary Poppins was published in 1934, and The Hobbit was published in 1937. But both of these books, out of all of those choices and more that I didn't list, both of them mention The Good Earth by Pearl S. Buck. Was it because it won a Pulitzer Prize in 1932, but they're set in 1936 and 1937. What are the chances? Now, in this story, Cussy Mary is having a conversation with one of her patrons, Jackson Lovett, on page 143. Jackson Lovett had gone out west to help build the Hoover Dam, and so he is a little bit more worldly when he comes back to Kentucky. And he says, "He handed me his loan and copy of A Sons by Pearl S. Buck. Have you read it yet?" "No, but I've heard good things about it, and I've read The Good Earth. It won the Pulitzer." I tried to hand the book back. He raised a palm. "It would be my pleasure if you'd read it. And yes, Earth deserved the prize, but I lost that one out west. An excellent book." So that's what it says in The Bookwoman. In The Giver of Stars on page 45. Who is that? Marjorie didn't look up. She was working her way through 2 piles of returned books, trying to decide which were too damaged to go out again. There was little point in sending out a book in which the last page was missing, as it already happened once. Waste of my time, had been the response from the sharecropper who had been given The Good Earth by Pearl S. Buck. I won't be reading that again. So, there's another very striking similarity to me, considering, The Hobbit, well, that was 1937. Gone with the Wind, As I Lay Dying, just tons of other books that were published in the 1930s, but they both chose The Good Earth. Now, another similarity is that both women, Cussie and Marjorie, have love interests in the story, and both of them are gifted books of poetry by those love interests. Both have an inscription or a marking to read the favorite poem in the book by those men. Let's see. The Bookwoman, it's on page 270. Carefully, I unwrapped a book of collected poems by Yeats. Thank you. It's beautiful. I rubbed my fingers over the gray buckram and beveled edges, traced the title on the leather label. It's the perfect start for a library, Cussie Mary. Library, I whispered, awed by his love of books. Our library. He opened up the collection to a title page, looked at me, and read the inscription he'd written along with the verse from one of Yeats's poems underneath. For my dear bride and bookwoman, Cussie Mary, October 20th, 1936. By the way, I didn't read her last name out loud, so you don't know who she marries. And shy as a rabbit, helpful and shy, to an isle in the water, with her I would fly. The Bookwoman. In The Giver of Stars on page 153. He studied her face for a moment, and then he walked slowly across to the shelves to the left of the front door. He scanned them, a nod of satisfaction escaping him when he found what he was looking for. He pulled a book from the shelf and brought it to her. She's a bit of a misfit, but I like the fire in her words. When I felt low, a few years back, I found some of these were helpful. He took a scrap of paper marking the page he had sought and handed it to her. I mean, you may not like them. Poetry is kind of a personal thing. I just thought. He kicked at a loose nail on the floor, and then he finally looked up at her. Anyways, I'll leave you to it. So, there are some differences in how they both speak about the poetry, but there you go. Now, both characters have a love interest, and there is a specific date that happens with both of these love interests, a specific moment that happens with both of these love interests. And I don't want to talk about too much of what happens because I think that gives away a lot of the story. So the love interests have a lot of similarities in between the two. And then both of them receive a gift in both books of a homemade quilt. Both of the characters, Cussie and Marjorie, with their love interests. But I don't know if that's a similarity or a sign of the time to give something practical, beautiful, handmade. That's all you could give. So I don't think a handmade quilt is too much of a similarity. And then both of them were had requests for specific magazines from their patrons. And once again, I don't know that this is a specific thing because in the beginning I mentioned these women, these pack horse librarians, a lot of their requests were for picture books, children's books, and then magazines. So in our stories, both Alice and Cussie had patrons request copies of Women's Home Companion. One wanted it, and here, page 82. I think this is kind of a funny little tip. Be obliged to get one. Nestor Riley's been reading it, and she told me in passing last year she ain't rubbed groundhog brains on her baby's sore teeth or needed to use the hen innards on the gums of her teething ones since. And after she'd read about a good paste recipe that cured thrush, Nestor said, none of her 9 young'uns ain't ever had to drink water from a stranger's shoe again to get the healing. So, a lot of strange things that they believed, but they thought that what they were doing was keeping them healthy. So that was what one patron requested Woman's Home Companion for. In The Giver of Stars, we have on page 73, Kathleen. Have you got any of those Woman's Home Companion magazines? Said the young woman. This baby is just a devil to settle right now, and I was wondering if they had anything that would help. I can read good enough, can't I, Garrett? Miss O'Hare brought me some a while back, and they had all advice on all sorts. I think it's his teeth, but he don't want to chew on nothing. So, both specifically asked for Woman's Home Companion and mentioned the baby's teeth. I don't know. Is it something they had to worry about a lot? So, those are several of the similarities in these two books, and it could easily be assumed that these authors drew major inspiration from their own stories, from that Smithsonian, from their own research, and just thinking about the times in the 1930s, 36 and 37. And if you read the timeline, now we heard about what Kim Michelle Richardson said, that she started researching in 2015, and Moyes didn't hear about pack horse librarians until about 2017 through that Smithsonian article. And on September 11th, 2017, Moyes wrote on her personal Facebook page, which is public, had an idea for a book or film a couple of months ago based on a thing from history which few people seem to have heard of. Started sending off for materials, got excited, began planning a research trip. The historical thing was in the U.S. A week ago, I found someone who had posted an article on this exact same subject on here, tagging a bunch of other writers and saying they should write about it. Today, I discovered a new Wikipedia page for it. Question: do I accept that someone else is going to write about the thing and give up? It's quite a specific thing. Or just go ahead and write my thing and hope that it comes out earlier and better. So she posted that 2 months before the Publisher Marketplace announcement of Richardson's book, and around the same time that Richardson's manuscript was first submitted to various editors at Penguin Random House and other publishers. Now, I think it's up to you if you read both books and decide. Do you think that Moyes may have heard of this one and taken some inspiration, some plagiarism? I don't know. But there are some similarities that are very strange. The Good Earth, the hillmen attacking them on the trail, the Woman's Home Companion, and the baby, the thing for baby teeth. I'm not sure. I think that's kind of up to you. There's obviously no legal action that's taking place right now regarding this. So I do have one more quote from Richardson, and it is ending at the end of our BuzzFeed article. Richardson said, if given the opportunity to talk to Moyes, she would want to discuss what she calls the bizarre similarities in their books. But ultimately, she said, it was always my belief that there's room for more than one story about the pack horse librarians in this world, and these fierce and little-known women deserved to be celebrated globally after 80 years of being nothing more than a blip in history. So maybe we just celebrate that they are getting their shining light moment after being nothing more than a blip. And we have these books to thank for bringing them to our forefront, because if I wouldn't have done it, wouldn't have heard of either of these. So one more thing, my notes are all over the place here. There is also a book that we have here. This is called Down Cut Shin Creek, The Pack Horse Librarians of Kentucky, by Kathy Appelt and Jean Canella Schmitzer. And at the end, it's got a chapter titled The Legacy, and this is Carl D. Perkins. So, The Legacy. Between 1943, when pack horse library service ended, and 1957, when bookmobiles became more common, Eastern Kentuckians were left with little library service, and many had none at all. County libraries, if they existed, struggled to keep their heads above water and could not even consider delivery or outreach. Nothing matched the services provided by the Pack Horse Library Project, and it would be years before many areas had library service again. It's not surprising that in 1956, it was a congressman from Kentucky, the late Carl D. Perkins, who would sponsor the Library Services Act that made the first federal appropriations for library service. As a young man during the 1930s, Perkins was a teacher in rural Knott County. We know that the school in which he taught was serviced by one of Kentucky's bookwomen, so it's highly possible that their dedication made an impact on his lifelong support for libraries, not only in Kentucky, but the whole nation. The Library Services Act that he sponsored helped provide funds for the establishment of new libraries, the building of branch libraries, and the purchase of bookmobiles, the procurement of library collections, and the hiring of new librarians. In short, the LSA helped build a system of libraries in our country that is among the world's best. Maybe, just maybe, a pack horse librarian helped inspire him. We'll never know for sure. The fact remains that the project created a desire for reading and learning in all who participated. It operated in the most difficult terrain and under tremendous social pressures, and it created a usable collection of reading materials from ragged, unwanted donations. This book is also available. It's in our children's room. It's a nonfiction, so that means it's the true facts. The Library Services Act is still a thing today, and I think it's now called the Library Service and Technology Act, I know the acronym for it, LSTA Act, and it's one of those things that the federal government still supports, except sometimes it's on the chopping block. So that act goes all the way back to the 1950s because of this congressman from Kentucky, Carl Perkins, and his belief in the pack horse librarian. So I think we have these ladies and this gentleman to thank for libraries, of what we know today. And I think that's all I had today. We have The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek by Kim Michelle Richardson, The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. These are the two books that I reviewed today and told you about some of their similarities, and it's up to you to read them both and decide, do you think there's too many similarities in them or what? I did have a question, which book did you like best? I think I liked this one because learning of the Blue people of Kentucky, the few gates of Kentucky, and it just seemed to be a little bit more historical for me. I think this one is a little bit more dramatic and person-centered, whereas this is like a lot of history, and they're different. They're good in their own right, but I did enjoy this one. So if you want to learn more, there's also Down Cut. Gosh, I mispronounce this every time. Down Cut Shin Creek. And then last week we got a shipment of books, and inside it was this one, The Librarian of Boone's Hollow by Kim Vogel Sawyer. This is an inspirational title, so I said I gotta check that out and read it real quick. This is also during the Great Depression. Addie Cowherd is in her junior year at I'm not sure what college, University of Kentucky, and she gets noticed that she can't attend school there anymore. Her father lost his job due to the Great Depression, and so a job falls into her lap to move to Boone's Hollow and become, what do you think, a pack horse librarian. So this one is a different story, and I really enjoyed this one. It also has its own excitement, but it does not have the similarities that these two have. So I think they're all great to read. There's also a picture book, which I did not get my hands on, but it's called That Book Woman. So it really seems like in the past year and a half, there have been a lot of books published on these pack horse librarians, and I really enjoy what Richardson said. Finally, these fierce and little-known women deserve to be celebrated globally after 80 years of being nothing more than a blip in history. So, thanks everyone that watched along. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, I'm not going to delete this. Please come in and check these books out. Request these books. You can rewatch this. Tell me what you think. I'd really love to talk about these books with you. And I hope that you have a great rest of your Wednesday. Bye, everyone.